Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Blue Collar Workers. As always, I'm John, Sean, or 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐿.
I'm Chris.
And we are your voice, your nation. And as always, it is a pleasure to see you all once more. Today, we're going to be talking solely about Reform UK and Nigel Farage and the incredible, outstanding, and almost salacious lies that Nigel Farage gets into on a weekly, if not monthly basis. But Chris has got something sarky to say.
I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen, a shirt. Yeah, do you know how rare this site is? I don't give a crap if it's due to the heat. It's just it's in a shirt.
This specific shirt it was given to me by a Muslim brother who's from the UAE. Alhamdulillah, I'm not going to mention his name. He's a lovely brother, and he says this helps with heat. 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐿, I hear you in Britain don't seem to understand how to deal with it very well. I said it's the humidity as well. So he sent this shirt, and it has been.
It's not the heat that's the issue; it's the humidity. That's the issue.
It is always the humidity with Britain, but this is amazing. This shirt just the heat rolls off it. Like it's one of those kind of fabrics. I don't know how much it costs. I haven't been told, but it's really, really good for hot weather. And that is the only reason you see me in a shirt, which is not a usual thing, as Chris has just quite correctly said. I don't wear them normally. My sister had to fight me to get me into a suit for a wedding. Because I just, it's not my thing. I don't wear suits. I don't wear sharp clothing usually. But alhamdulillah, one of my beautiful brothers sent me this. And oh my God, for function, it's amazing. And yeah, okay, Chris made a comment because obviously it does look quite smart. As, let's be fair, and in the male population, the Arabs know how to dress.
You're only just picking it up.
I come for the function. This whole delight works. It works. Anyway, getting on with today's podcast. This is all about reform and how they have genuinely
and twat Farage.
And their liar in chief. I like that one. The liar in chief. I saw that online.
Liar twat in chief.
Liar in chief, Nigel Farage, because he has never spoken a political word of honesty in his life. From the claim of the battle bus all the way back during the Brexit, referring towards the failures of the councils, the disastrous actions involving his parties, UKIP, Brexit, his very short career as a Conservative, and now as the leader of probably one of the most xenophobic parties in Northern Europe, let's be quite frank. Chris has some points. I have 8 pages. So if you're not here to see us rebuttal Nigel Farage, alhamdulillah, please go off and see another one of our podcasts.
I entice you to stay because it's going to get interesting.
Oh, it's going to get spicy.
let's put this way. I'm going to bring up his manifesto. Sorry.
I wouldn't wipe a Rockweiler's arse with that manifesto.
I'm going to bring up the points he's brought up in the manifesto. Well, I've literally researched the bullet point version because in fact I've skimmed over.
Have you seen how many versions of it he's had?
Yeah, it's fucking ridiculous. And literally picked that apart. He's going to pick apart his integrity.
The man no, he doesn't have one. Yeah. No, I'm putting out the actual blatant lies he has. He has no integrity. Nigel Farage binned his integrity when he chased after the ethno-nationalist vote.
So I'm going for the more let's destroy this political shit. He's just going to tear him a new one.
Farage has already admitted that he was just making stuff up to do well in the local elections. Now he claims he would bring back the winter fuel payments for pensioners and scrap the 2-child line on welfare support. The latest episodes of 50 Shades of Grey vote is starting. In January, Farage was gifted by Bloomberg about Reform 2024 election promises. The Institution for Physical Studies has found that Reform's economical plan was off by tens of billions of pounds. His response to accusations by saying, I fully accept the point you're making, but we weren't going to win the last election. So the promises made in that election were just to set out our vision broadly of what we wanted to go. Translated was, we're lying through our fucking teeth because we know we won't get elected.
I'm going to say, it seems you bring up the economical plans.
He's got one here.
One of those is what I bring up because of the fact it ties in with the manifesto. But it's just coming straight off the press. Well, I say straight off. It's probably dated a couple of weeks or months ago. But Nigel Farage's economic plans are an utter disaster. This was in the newspaper. Unfortunately, it is Actually, I don't know. The Economist
is pretty solid.
The Economist
When it comes
is
to
pretty
money,
good, yeah.
when it comes to money, the Economist has got their ball on the corner. They like the Guardian, they like the Times. They have genuinely quite sensible points of view.
But yeah, they're literally like when Reform UK sent 5 members to Parliament last year. Nigel Farage was a populist party leader, called it a bridgehead. Triumphing wins across England's local elections on May the 1st marked the next stage of assault, and I hate the fact that I have to try and create a free trial. I've done that earlier.
You forgot.
No, I've done it earlier.
Why didn't you take all the paperwork?
Fuck off. I ain't doing that. Do that one actually has to spare money. But literally, I read about it earlier. Whatever budget plan he's got in place, because of the fact I did have it bullet pointed, but it's gone. It's a bunch of bollocks. He's lying to his ass, as you said. He's literally he's off by billions.
The man's economical policy is off by tens of billions of pounds. You cannot trust this man. He's speaking, he's lying, and he's worse than the liars that involve the current two parties, because they are actually held to physical responsibility. Nigel Farage will say anything, and the ethno-nationalists will say anything to get him elected. It is an insanity. In January, Farage was gifted by Bloomberg about Reform 2024's election promises. As I previously said, trusting a politician who overly admits to lying can surely only be explained by a desire for punishment. We've been here before with Nigel Farage. This week, he tells pensioners and parents with more than 2 children that he's going to fight for them. But Farage is like a date who doesn't want you talking to his exes. His exes, in this case, being the long list of farmers, fish workers, small business owners, people who rely on the NHS, and the entirety of the working class. All the people that he promised Brexit would help. It hasn't. Brexit has been nothing but a disaster, and Nigel Farage and Reform are the end result of that horrific monstrosity that we have engaged in upon ourselves.
As you has mentioned, Brexit, so I'm going to tie it in with some of his bullet-pointed manifesto points. He wants to abolish the Northern Ireland Brexit deal.
That'll start shit.
Yeah.
My cousins will kick off. Will kick off.
Speaking of Northern Ireland, Farage fancies ripping up the post-Brexit deal on the country's trade rules, painstakingly negotiated by Tory leader Rishi Sunak. The Windsor framework, the breakthrough plan aimed to resolve a host of issues with the Brexit setup governing Northern Ireland and to convince unionists in the region to return to its power-sharing government amid a boycott. The Democratic Unionist Party held out for some time, but finally rejoined the power sharing earlier this year. But Reform, which is on paper at least, allied with the hardline traditional Unionist Voice Party in Northern Ireland, describes the treaty as worse than the original Northern Ireland protocol it replaced. The whole plan is meant to avoid a hard border on the islands of Ireland, but Reform does not say how. If it scrapped the framework, it would dodge such an outcome.
There is Reform can't sit here and say that they're going to scrap a legal documentation that's designed to stop infighting between Northern Irish Catholics, my father's people, and the Northern Irish Protestants, the British people, relatively speaking, and the rest of the Republic. It will explode. It will become another hot point in Europe. Categorically, my cousins will not sit there and let Farage tear down their ability with a hard border. That's what will happen. Ireland will be forced to build a hard border because of the European Union's trade laws. Ireland will be forced to do that. This is what Farage's plan is. The plan is to tear up the deal and make Ireland build a hard border. He'll force them to do it, because he'll say the deal was crap and blah, blah, blah. I refuse to negotiate with it, which will force France, Germany, and all the other European major economies to say to Ireland, you have to put a hard border. This will cause conflict. Britain, you have to understand, you will return us towards the conflicts that happened during mine and Chris's childhood. Now, many of you young Brexiters who are supporters of Brexit may not remember this, but those were horrifying times for me as an Irish young man. When I was a schoolboy, I was getting the shit kicked out of me for stuff that had nothing to do with me because of a conflict going on in where I was born and amongst my family and kin. Do you know what I'm saying? And Chris's people were learning drills about how to evacuate fucking schools. Okay, that was a real terrifying moment in British history. If Farage gets his way, what he will do is he will tear up that agreement. He will do nothing more because that's pretty much Farage's MO. And then Ireland will be forced to put a hard border in because Europe will want to keep its integrity of its trade agreements. If that hard border comes in, there will be blood. I am telling you, as a British Irishman, there will be fucking blood.
Even I know that's just a bad idea.
It's beyond a fucking bad idea, but people like Farage don't give a shit. He's a populist. Populists don't care about the consequences of their actions. And this is the danger you live in, Britain. Look at what Trump's doing right now. Look at his big, beautiful bill that he's building right now. All the American people hate it. American businesses hate it. The only people who are benefiting from that bill are the billionaires, the really top billionaires. It is the key factor why him and his one-time political ally Elon Musk have had a massive falling out, because Elon wants to slash the costs of big government, and it triples the US debt. It's insane. The big beautiful bill is insane. And Farage is like a mini Trump here in the UK. And he is as toxic as that comes with that populistic ideology.
As you say on populist ideology, regarding obviously doing a U-turn on obviously the winter fuel payments, he's just reacting to what the people want. Absolutely.
He's a reactionist and a populist. And people really need to pay attention to how dangerous that is. 69% of UK farmers believe Brexit had hurt them. The National Federation of Fishermen Organisation says Brexit will have cost them 300 million by next year. The Federation of Small Businesses is screaming for relief from the damage of Brexit. Even medical bodies, from the British Medical Associations to the Nuffield Trust, says that Brexit is damaging our national health. Reform's own candidates have admitted that Brexit has made us poorer, and even said that if elected, there is no deal Brexit policy would damage our food supplies for the next 20 years. Reform candidates have said this. And yet Nigel continues to hoke on about how excellent Brexit would be and how the opportunity hasn't been resolved and how Britain could lift itself up in the Brexit society if it just applied itself more. I can get this right. It's like communism. Communism does not work internationally. It just doesn't. I mean, I like the idea. See, this is the problem. I like the idea. The idea of communism is beautiful. Let's be quite honest about that. But it does not work. We human beings are too greedy. We're too selfish. We do not have the mental capacity to make communism work. As an ideology, to read, Chris, it's quite beautiful. You know, society's looked after, assets are shared, the people are all given what they need. But in practice...
Do you know what you just said to me there?
What?
Literally, most people relate to it as a utopia.
Yeah. But communism isn't a utopia. That's the problem. It fails. It fails on every metric. And we know it has failed because we have seen it in large nations, in small nations. Communism has not succeeded in any part of the world. It's one of these dead ideologies, relatively speaking. There are very few communist nations left in the world because of how destructive it is towards the society and economy. And I'm not a fan of capitalism. This is not me kind of tooting the horn of mass capitalism and vampire capitalism that we live in today and corporate feudalism that many people use.
I think the only way it would work is to take some parts of one.
That's why the socialism, constructed socialism,
and then merge it into two. So, but at the moment, even socialism's fucking failing. So
because big corporations have been given too much power.
Yeah,
because they can buy politicians and they can buy their political things. We need to get money out of the political circuit. That's how you solve we leave the corporates to do their business involving corporate business, but get them out of politics will solve a lot of our problems.
Yeah, stop giving them too much power to sway what they want.
Yeah, exactly. Can you imagine dating someone who you previously seen cheat on every partner they've ever had? I'm not judging, however. If not about getting a freedom from humiliation, I must ask why anyone would believe Reform's new claims regarding pensions and child poverty. They have lied about fishing, they have lied about farming, they have lied about small businesses, they lied about Brexit. Why can anybody genuinely consider this party and its liar-in-chief Nigel Farage anywhere serious?
And on that, because it ties in nicely, because of the fact he wants to make big tax cuts and big spending cuts. Reform's manifesto contains tax cuts which, according to the party's own estimates, add up to at least 70 billion a year. I very much doubt that. The biggest of those is a pledge to raise the earnings levels at which Brits start paying income tax. So he wants to make it so you earn more before you start paying tax. A move that will lift 7 million people out of paying the levy. To raise those sums, reform reaches for a levy often pulled by politicians trying to find cash down the back of the sofa, cutting government waste. Farage's party reckons it could save billions through slashing government excess, part of which is forcing all government departments to save £5 in every 100. That means big spending cuts across public services and government department. The thing that worries me the most, it says public services. And
public services are already fucking squeezed in every aspect. We only have to take Gloucestershire's police force as an example. Magnificent men and women doing an absolutely horrific job because there is not enough of them. There is physically, Gloucester Police Force is massively understaffed.
You shouldn't be cutting public services.
No,
you should be investing in funding
to it. And the reason you can't, and I know me and Chris harper on about the fucking reforming the tax system, but Farage isn't talking about reforming the tax system. He's talking about cuts, put more money technically back in the pockets of British people whilst removing all of these public services. Okay? Things will fall horrifically apart.
And let's put it this way. I reckon it's a sly cover. Going by that, he wants to cut public services, which will then push it more into private sectors.
Absolutely.
Therefore, the money that's in your pocket won't last in your pocket because you'll be going straight to private to fund the private stuff.
For equities, where public systems used to exist that were cheaper and more affordable for you. Farage and the Reform Party are financially a fucking disaster for every single Briton on this island. Every white man who stands up and pays attention to Nigel Farage, calls him a good man and a leader, needs to be lobotomized, in my honest opinion. Because if you actually believe reform stuff these days, you really need to start actually reading their material.
They're a financial vampire. They're trying to squeeze as much as they could.
Absolutely.
Or some of the younger generation, or the ones that are not quite financially in tune with stuff.
Destroy your future.
No, a gold digger.
Yeah, a gold digger. And destroy your future. There is no justifiable reason why anybody should vote reform. They screw the pensioners. They screw the public services that pensioners will use. Damaging the NHS. Remember, Nigel Farage believes in privatised healthcare. This man wants to absolutely scrap the NHS.
Hence the reason why he wants to make tax cuts, because he wants to push everything towards private.
Absolutely, absolutely. He believes in a privatizational system, which will not work. It will not work. The country will collapse.
Massive example, look at the USA.
Yeah, the US is collapsing now from this very thing involving their Medicaid and their corporate insurance. It's nightmarish stuff.
I could say people could barely afford to actually get medical cover in the USA, let alone anything else.
Farage has always said that he believes in a small state and individual responsibility. Translates, it's not the government's job to look after you. The former Tory turned Reform MP, Lee Anderson, has blamed food poverty in the UK on people not being able to budget or cook properly because, according to him, meals can be made for just 30p. I am a 20-year chef. Chris has been in the food industry probably 15 years as a manager. You cannot feed anybody, one human being, on 30p's worth of fucking food in today's economy. You cannot do it.
It was a struggle in the comedy back in the day, let alone today.
When we were kids, you could probably do a snack on 30 fucking p when 30p went further. A snack.
You used to be able to go to the local newsagents and buy 30p's worth of pick and mix.
When we were kids.
When we were kids. Spare my day used to be
That's
a penny
40
a sweet.
fucking years now ago.
That was a penny a sweet. So those were the days where I would think, that's quite nice. That was a nice balance. Not too cheap, not too expensive. It was about right. But now it's just stupid.
It's insane. A Snickers these days is £1.90.
Don't.
Bottle of Coke, £2.10.
I remember when a standard bar of chocolate, which was bigger in size than it used to be.
Shrink inflation as well.
Yeah, shrink inflation. So the fact it was bigger in size used to cost roughly between 30 to 50p, depending on what was in it. That's for a standard bar of chocolate.
I remember when bottles of Coke were 50p a bottle.
Yeah.
You know, we were teenagers back then. What you've got to understand is shrinkflation is a massive issue. So is the cost of living, and the cost of living has been led on by Brexit. Nigel Farage is the root cause of the poverty on this island to my British people. You need to pay attention to this. This is from a party whose founding policy is UKIP, Brexit, has taken £1,000 from the average UK household, and we're expected to believe that Reform now wants to spend billions on poor parents and pensioners. They don't. They categorically don't. They're lying through their fucking teeth to get into Parliament so that they can rake the money in for private sectors and get bonuses back from their friends. They want to do what the Conservatives have been doing. They are literally conservative nasty. You have Conservatives now who are still a nasty bunch of bastards as it is, because they've moved away from the centre of the things. The one Tory party should, the one Tory caucus, that's what was the centralist, should resign from the entire Conservative Party, because it's turning into chasing the ethno-nationalists every single day. Kelly Bennock turns more and more nasty alongside her top leaders, trying to chase Nigel Farage, because the British press continually raise the thing about, oh, Brexit and immigration, because it's populist fear. And you need to take apart a lot of these policies of these nutcase fucking politicians. Of course, nobody sensible is saying Keir Starmer's Labour Party has been smashing it. We don't. Yeah, we criticise Keir Starmer and the Labour Party quite regularly. We don't. But in comparison, I mean, if I have to choose between Conservatives and Nigel Farage, it's going to be the Conservative Party, because there is some redeeming features in the Conservative Party. They're not many, but seriously, Nigel Farage...
It's not going to cause as much damage if you used to vote Nigel Farage.
Yeah. Starmer has literally said, we are the party of the central ground. Parties may win elections from the centre under the effective two-party voting system, but delivering change for people in poverty means pushing specific directions. And these directions is, by definition, left, because it involves shifting the benefits of society towards the most vulnerable people to address social injustice. That's virtually the definition of woke. Farage and the Reform UK know this. That's why they're now adopting policies that are more left-wing than their leader of the Labour Party, as Prime Minister Starmer is stuck with a difficult choice to make. In opposition, it doesn't matter if to Farage how realistic his promises are. He can afford to oppose unpopular policies because he's not in power.
I could say, because of the fact you mentioned that on this manifesto, it brings up doing a new voting system.
And that's something I actually agree with. We do need to get past the two-party system.
Obviously, it says, despite making a big impact on national politics over the last decade, Farage himself has never entered the House of Commons. That is a major point to take into account.
He is now. He is now.
Yeah, obviously he's only just got into it, and his parties have struggled to win seats. This has led Farage aligning himself with parts of the Britain's left in calling for more proportional voting system, which isn't listed as a critical reform required in the first 100 days. Reform's manifesto does promise a referendum on the current voting system, which it says shuts out new parties and leaves large numbers of voters with no representation in Parliament. In the other pledge that brings Farage's party in line with many of the left, Reform also calls for the unelected House of Lords to be replaced with a much smaller, more democratic second chamber.
There are 7 members of the Reform Party that are members of Parliament right now, 7 of them in total. And half of them are ex-Conservatives who were absolutely batshit crazy, so bad the Conservative Party considered throwing them out. That's how crazy they are. And some of them were done for corruption. I believe Rupert Lowered, he's also been suspended. See, this is how bad it is. Some of these people have been suspended from the Conservative Party and have then jumped ship to the Reform Party. And we have another one that's been also suspended from the Reform Party. How bad a politician do you have to be thrown out of the ethno-nationalist voters? I mean, this boggles your brain. How bad of a human being and political leader do you have to be suspended from Reform UK?
What freaking goddamn extreme left things is he spouting? Right wing, should I say. That to be spouting such things to be booted out of 2 parties.
I actually don't know what he's been thrown out from. Bullying allegations. Bullying.
Bullying.
Verbal threats against him. No, he's made verbal threats against people.
Well, that sounds like the Conservatives at the moment, don't it?
That's entirely likely. I mean, he's vile. He's vile human being. I don't even know how Rupert Lower got into Parliament. It's just one of these kind of things that boggles my brain. He looks like one of them kind of evil little fucking 10 despots, doesn't he? It's a picture of him.
He looks like one of those ones which is on a horror movie committing the satanic ritual.
That's brutal.
And he's usually one of the ones which gets his head lopped off by the people that are trying to get away.
Nigel Farage has lied about immigration. When people tried to have a sensible, grown-up debate about immigration and acknowledge that immigration has had massive imports and contributions not just to our society, but to the health of our economy, public services, they are dismissed as metropolitan elites. There is nothing metropolitan elite about me and Christopher. We live in the fucking countryside. We need more migrants. We are not having enough babies. We are not having enough babies because the tax system is horrifically unfair to the British public and is reliant on corporations being given tax breaks. Vast amounts of them. So the important contribution, not only to our society, as I've just said, they are dismissed as metropolitan elites. They don't understand. It's a dangerous lie when you start constructing so-called solutions to problems we face day in, day out. You end up building an entire machine of deceit. Nigel Farage has been front and centre of these efforts and should be held accountable. He should, unquestionably. This is one of the greatest lies about immigration. Immigration benefits these United Kingdoms. You, the British public, are not having enough kids to sustain your society. Okay? You're just not.
On the fact of his immigration, freeze on non-essential immigration is one of the points that he's bringing up in his manifesto. Farage has long pitched himself as an anti-immigration populist, and the first pages of his reform manifesto are giving over to a bold pledges on migration. Most eye-catchingly, reforms document promises to freeze non-essential immigration to the UK. It says essentially skilled mainly around healthcare must be the only exception, but does not go into any further detail on how this will operate. Farage has previously defined non-essential immigration as meaning unskilled labour. Reform also calls for a new employer immigration tax, which would see the national insurance employee pay levy hiked to 20% for foreign workers, with limited exceptions for healthcare workers and small businesses. It could be a vote winner, but employers outside the National Health Service that rely on overseas labour, such as the already Brexit hit hospitality sector, are unlikely to be overjoyed with that one.
More importantly, migrant workers work in all sectors of our country. Farming is desperate for migrant workers. We used to have migrant workers come in from Romania who would come in as seasonal workers. That's all stopped. We've lost all of our seasonal workers. We have desperate need for pickers. Jobs that the general British population does not want to do. The average teenager does not vision himself going out and picking the vegetables to feed his country. Okay, he just doesn't. This is something you need to understand. So we need migrant workers to do the general soft labour that the British public do not want to do. Because you will lose your civilization if you cannot feed it. Okay? We already rely on Europe horrifically for the amount of food we need. 45% of Britain's food comes from across Europe. I thought it was 60 from an earlier podcast. I was wrong. I'm just correcting myself now. So when this comes up and someone says, oh, you said 60, that was because I was in error of the previous podcast. And unlike Nigel Farage, I admit when I'm wrong. When I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong. So it's about 45% of Britain's food. But that represents tens of millions of British people's food. So there's no gentle way of putting that. You could wave a Harry Potter wand and make all the 13 million migrants across the United Kingdom vanish, and you still wouldn't have enough labour or manpower or housing to house, man, and maintain this society. You just wouldn't, okay? There are not enough, let's be fucking racist about this just for half a second, there are not enough white people having babies. There's just not. Okay,
there's not enough people having babies in general.
and ignore the white people part. The British population, mixed race, ethnic minorities across the entire board are having less children.
No, as you bring up the child thing, it's already been brought up in the news several times. The
globe is having a birth rate deficit.
Yeah, that's the globe, not just UK. Everybody's
having a birth deficit. We need to solve this problem. We need to start encouraging people to have more children. The planet is losing population. You lose population, it is more difficult to replace it. It gets more difficult each generation. And these conversations need to be had by adult political pundits, me and Chris, and politicians. We haven't got any at the moment because nobody in the political circle is talking about helping families have children. Nigel Farage is a populist. Ignore anything that man says out of his mouth. He has no idea how he would finance his policies. None whatsoever.
I've seen this. It's already been proven that his financial manifesto is billions out of whack.
Yeah, tens of billions out of whack. Financially unfucking accountable. The man lies every second word he talks about when speaking in politics. I specifically put in brackets politics because I don't know the man on a personal level and I don't know what he says in private and personal family life. That's none of my business.
I dread to think what he says in that.
I suspect he lies in public for public votes. I don't think he's necessarily on a personal character level. This is done for political reasons. You've got to give. Don't underestimate Nigel Farage's intelligence. I think that's quite dangerous when people do that. That's something we should never actually do. The EU is unelected. This is another great phase that the Brit exodus have stopped talking about for quite some time. In his speech, Farage accuses the European Commission of being the sole arbiter of legislation in the European Union. He's got form on this, a lot of it. In reality, the Commons takes its priorities from elected member states, governments, the Council, and performs a role more akin to the British civil servants. The third institution, the European Parliament, is made up of directly elected MEPs, of which Farage was one, and they write laws and policies for the European Union. So the claim that the EU is an unelected body is garbage. It's absolute garbage. In a British kind of conversation, it's nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The majority of our laws were made by the EU. This is, again, bollocks. Absolute bollocks. Farage and his ilk have been getting away with this one for far too long. He claims that 70% of the laws in the UK were made by the EU. The real number is difficult to qualify, but the Independent House of Commons Library puts it around 13.2% when dealing with matters that are outside of the direct need of the UK and its people. And those are trade laws. There are always laws on trade. Those are trade laws, Chris.
I was going to say, everything I've looked at, it literally says he wants, obviously, repeal all retained EU laws on British statute book and renegotiate the EU trade deal. He's after the EU.
Of course he is.
He's after and to introduce a free speech bill to stop left-wing bias.
You are free to speak. You're not free from the consequences of your speech. I absolutely believe in that kind of point of view. I'm free to say anything I want. I could say some really horrible things. The country allows me to speak, even on this platform, some absolutely outrageous things like the gays are coming for your kids. That's garbage. I know that's garbage, but I'm free to say that. But I'm not free if I use that in a form that causes hate and therefore are immune to the consequences. The consequences will come back to me. I do not in any way, shape or believe that gays are coming after everyone's kids as the American, that pundit kind of vile point of view.
I've never even once thought that, let alone
the British people don't buy into that kind of gay attack on children institution.
I think most of us are like,
are you out your mind? You have to.
They're them. Leave them alone.
Yeah, gay people are lovely people. They get on with their business. They do their business, and you move on. There is some things that go on the woke agenda that I do disagree with, but I'm not here to directly come into a tangent about that. Yeah. My goal today is to point out the unconditional amount of lying that Nigel Farage engages in, and it is prolific. Him, his party, his ex-MPs, his ex-political love affests like fishermen, Brit Exeters, anybody who's ever been spoken to by Nigel Farage. Here's another one of Nigel Farage's lies. The EU cost Britain 55 million a day. Do you all remember this? Back in Brexit conversation back in 2016, Nigel Farage and the battle bus alongside Boris Johnson, good old Johnson. We know he's fucking full of shit as well. Thank God he's out of politics. Talked about the 55 million it cost Britain per day.
I think that's what swung half the people, you know.
Every time I hear this, I'm immediately transported back to the referendum campaign, and it makes me want to put my head through a wall. That sums up my opinions perfectly. Let's be clear, the EU does not cost 55 million every day. This is double the real number. It's more like in the 20 million a day, and does not account for the benefits we got back. And before you ask, no, 350 million extra a week will not be going into the NHS, as was suggested by Nigel Farage and all the Brexiters, which they climbed back from the minute the vote came in. They all ran away from the 350 million. Tell me, Nigel, and all of your Brexit allies, where is our 350 million per week for the NHS?
350 million per week. What freaking planet are they on?
I would love to know where that 350 million is.
350 million a week would, after 2 months, the NHS would have been solved.
Just no. There would have been still some problems now, you know.
Mostly solved. Like all the
big problems would have been out of the way. We'd still need to build new hospitals and stuff like that. Where's that 350 million, Brexiters?
Hang on. When did he say that will come into effect? Or was it at Brexit?
At Brexit.
At Brexit. How many years since Brexit?
2016.
2016, right? So that's
nearly 10 years ago.
Big backdated bill right there.
Nigel, can I have my 350 million a week, please? For the last 10 years, I've got some holes I'd like to fill in that you promised us. You promised us 350 million a week, Nigel. Where's my 350 million a week? Like bastard.
No.
It's just it astounds me the lies that come out of Nigel Farage's mouth.
That's 1.82 billion a year.
Where's my 1.8 billion, Nigel?
It turns into like 1.8 trillion for 10 years.
No, that's got to be off.
That's got to be off.
No, that's more like 180 billion in 10 years. Because remember, a trillion is a billion billion.
Underneath,
Nuts. 180 billion. Yeah, Nigel, where's my 180 billion?
I say when it starts going to that figure, my calculator is going to error.
So, here are 5 to be going on with. He said that Barack Obama enacted extreme vetting on immigration during his presidency. He didn't. Obama reviewed the vetting processes of applications to citizens of a single country, Iraq, and then only to refugees and applicants for special immigration visas. Unlike Trump, who has ordered a ban on people from several countries with a population of more than 130 million, including tourists and business travelers. Farage also said Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain refused to take a single refugee or displaced person from Syria, when in fact there are actually 2 to 3 million Syrians in the Gulf countries, many of whom arrived when the war began, and there are no therefore included in the UAE statistics. The Saudi government has, since the conflict began in 2011, housed 2.5 million refugees and has given permanent residency to hundreds of thousands of Syrians. Hundreds of thousands of them. The Arab and Muslim populations are really bad at this, and I as a Muslim will say that. They are bad. Turkey is the country we should be praising. Turkey and Egypt. They are the people who have taken in the most damaged parts of Western warfare that has gone on in Iraq and Syria. The Turks have been nothing but incredibly charitable to their Muslim brothers and sisters, alhamdulillah, because the Turks have taken in millions and millions of people. It's unbelievable levels of support. In a speech, Farage accused the European Commission of being the sole arbiter of legislation in the European Union. In reality, the Commission takes its priorities from elected members of state governments, the Council, as I've previously said, and 70% of the laws in the UK are not made in the EU. They're just not. As I said earlier, it's about 13%. The reality is Nigel Farage doesn't stop lying. It's in his second nature to, in fact, in my opinion.
I reckon it's just his first language when it comes to politics.
Yeah, I do. Also, Nigel Farage has backed down on his claims that the Commons authorisation told him not to constituency surgeries on security grounds. When asked why he was lying after parliamentary sources denied it, the Reform leader rode back last month. Mr Farage claimed he would hold surgeries when Parliament allowed me. He said he'd been given guidance not to hold in-person surgeries by the Speaker's office and the parliamentary and security team. He claims were disputed by parliamentary sources who said no such advice had been given as it would interfere with Mr Farage's democratic duties. He was challenging the Speaker's office, had denied that this parliamentary security had no record and asked which one of you is lying. A humbled Mr Farage responds, the Speaker of Office is always right. Since becoming an MP in July, the Reform leader has repeatedly accused of not prioritising his Commons roles, coming under fire for spending time in the US in particular and not holding in-person surgeries in his Clacton constituency. He has not turned up at his constituency to do any kind of constituency work. None.
How on earth are you meant to do anything if you don't do that?
During a phone-in on LBC in September, Mr Farage suggested he had not yet held an in-person surgery for security reasons. Asked whether he had been advised for his own security not to hold surgery, he replied, I would have thought that would make sense, wouldn't you? So, I mean, the man obfuscates just about the material he's doing. He's a professional liar. He literally professionally lies. How, in the name of all that is British, can anyone truly vote for this man and his party?
Especially seeing regarding his line. He wants to leave the ECHR.
That will damage you, Britain.
Yeah.
That will damage you.
The European Convention on Human Rights. Without fully committing to it, aimed challenges to the government's controversial policy to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda. Leaving the ECHR, critic Farage went much further Monday. Reforms, contract talks up a 4-point plan of stopping small boats crossing the English Channel, the first of which is to leave the ECHR. It promises to reform Britain's human rights laws so that they put the rights of law-abiding people first.
It doesn't surprise me because, I mean, Nigel is one of those kind of people who I don't think you understand what will happen with the loss of the Human Rights Act.
It reckons it's necessary to enact the rest of the asylum policies, which includes promising zero illegal immigration to be resettled in the UK, and that illegal migrants in boats will be picked up and taken back to France. But alongside other consequences, leaving ECHR would imperil the Northern Ireland Good Friday Peace Agreement, something that is not touched on in the document.
Yeah. Again, Nigel doesn't want the responses. He wants to tear up things for populistical reasons and does not look at any of the consequences of his actions.
As soon as I read that, the fact that it's about human rights, I'm like, you're playing with fire there, dude.
You lose your human rights, you will be forced to, if you want to keep your job, you could be forced to work 60-hour weeks. I'm not kidding you here, Britain. If you vote for someone like Farage and you lose access to your human rights accord, you will lose shitloads of things. The British courts will not be able to stop anything that Farage does, okay? Because he will do them by acts of parliament, which the courts themselves cannot challenge if we have left a treaty. So if, at theory, Prime Minister Farage leaves the Human Rights Convention, your legal rights to work and everything is up for grabs with corporations. Everything. Absolutely fucking everything. There is no legitimate legal recourse because the British court must obey the sovereignty of Parliament.
And do you know what one thing that would come straight into play there? Your wage, you get paid.
Yeah. The minimum pay will go out the door.
That's protected by the human rights.
It's absurd. You have no idea. I need Brit-Exiters. No, Brit-Exiters don't care. The people who vote for Nigel Farage, I need the unconvinced Britons, the middle of the ground, and those slightly right-wing and me and Chris. We are ex-conservatives. Let's not kid ourselves here. We're not woke nutcases. We are ex-conservatives liberals. Look at the documentation, Britain. Look at what the EHRC protects you with. Please, for the love of Allah.
It protects a lot more than what you think.
Hugely. The documentation is a living...
The things that it protects is obviously the amount of hours you work, your holiday pay, the fact you get paid. Absolute shitload of stuff. More than you actually realise. Sick pay would go straight out the fucking window. Yeah.
If massive corporations on the FT 500 don't...
another thing that could potentially be gone is paternity.
Paternity leave.
Paternity and maternity leave.
Absolutely. You don't understand how much the legal protections of the Human Rights Act does. I mean, if Nigel Farage came into a minority power, there would be riots. There would have to be riots. He would have to be thrown out. Because in this two-part system, the rabid English hating any foreigner ideology has reached insane levels now. We have got to the point where we need to acknowledge that there is a fifth column to British society. Liberty, equality, decency, society. These things are falling apart. And this is a key factor on why me and Chris started this podcast, is because we needed a centralistical voice in the open internet to start actually talking about why these are bad ideas. And we are not woke leftists, because if we were, I'm telling you, we'd already fucking made it as podcasters.
God almighty, we'd be sat on the beach somewhere, taking multicolored spring jacket jet skis freaking going across the water.
Because there is not enough centralistical voices out there. There really is in Britain. You need to take great stock at how insanely damaging losing the Human Rights Act would be for all of you. Okay? Yes, we are having difficulty dealing with migrants because of the vampiric behaviour of lawyers. That can be looked at. You can hold certain things. You can change certain things without damaging the Human Rights Act. You can make an act of supremacy by Parliament telling the Human Rights Court they cannot interfere with the right to return migrants to the next closest, safest country. The European Courts of Human Rights could not stop that. So in the hypothetical situation that you have a sensible government that rises, turns around and says, right, we are going to now deport 100,000 failed immigrant asylum seekers to France, to Germany. That would be legal and lawful.
They've gone through the correct.
They've gone through all the channels.
Yeah.
They failed their asylum. Now you send them back to the country they came from. That is how you should respond to these problems. It would greatly discourage France from letting them constantly come across, because now the French have had to return 100,000 legal immigrants who have failed in their asylum. So you prove to the French they failed their asylum. We did not consider them valued parts to add to our society. We are returning them to you. That is a very liberal, social, and sociable norm, and you can do that in a humane manner.
And to most of the people that come to claim asylum, if they realise that the paperwork isn't up to scratch and realise they're being sent back to the previous point they're at, would make sure that they fill out the correct paperwork to come back again. Or if it's just non-acceptable, then they have to go back to wherever they come from.
At the time, Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay says, as a constituents MP in Chorley, I hold regular surgeries myself with constituents. And whenever a member asks me for advice on the matter, I always say that if you're going to hold constituent surgeries, make sure you take advice from the parliamentary and security departments and do so safely. I have never called for people to not do their duty in holding surgeries. You know what that is, don't you? That's where people gather and speak to their MP. So you can go to these surgeries to talk to your local MP.
You should do that more often.
Yeah, no, Nigel Farage hasn't done any of them yet.
Or can actually become mandatory.
A House of Commons spokesperson said the abilities for MPs to perform their parliamentary duties safely, both on and off their estates, is fundamental to our democracy. The Parliamentary Security Department works closely with the police, offer all MPs a range of security measures for those with offices or surgeries in their constituencies, helping to ensure a safe working environment. We do not comment on individual MP security arrangements or advice because we would not wish to compromise the safety of those MPs. Parliamentary staff or members of the public, but they are kept under continual review. Nigel Farage, about his own constituencies, has lied about anything and everything that comes into his elemental behaviour. The man is an habituating liar. This is not something I'm frightened to say. Nigel Farage is an habituated liar. He has been his entire career, relatively speaking. Nigel Farage recently stated that 7.2 million foreign-born people have registered with GPs in the last 10 years. All I'm doing here is giving you some hard facts. Well, the cold hard facts is that the actually variables of 40.6% of GPs in England and Wales are foreign-born. Do you understand the foreign-born nature of our GPs? If you didn't have foreign doctors, this country would be dying. from illnesses, from sicknesses. You are privileged if...
He's just gone back on himself.
Of course.
He said he doesn't want immigration. He wants to see...
No, he's talking about the NHS hospitals. He's not talking about GPs.
GPs. No.
Remember, he's talking about NHS hospitals.
No, the fact that he said that he only wants to bring in skilled labourers. Yeah, which includes doctors.
Doctors are one of the most skilled people in the world.
Yeah, and now he's complaining the fact that almost half of it is from foreign people.
Of course, it's a misrepresentation of the GP registration. And this is what Nigel Farage does. He does misrepresentation. He does misquotation. He does skewing of facts. The fact of the matter is more than 40% of all of our doctors are foreign. Absolutely.
I don't see an issue with that.
No. Because it's a skilled trade we need. We have an ageing population, Britain.
If they're a skilled doctor, which usually means they speak roughly around 2 languages, depending on where
they speak more than 2 languages. Most
I was going to say on bare minimum, so it'd be English, obviously the country they're coming to work in, plus their native language. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah, which naturally is going to be people from their native land living here. Which says to me, well, they're going to want to go to that doctor, which will then free up more English doctors for us English.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm just thinking just pure logic there.
Yeah. To be quite frank, the idea that any doctor, regardless of his ethnicity, we should be inviting doctors, scientists, engineers. I want all of that. I want all of that from all over the world because we need them. Okay? Britain has a cracking system in every aspect. Our roads are cracking, our power structure's cracking, our science is falling apart. Britain needs specialists in every district.
As you mentioned, power, he wants to rip up Britain's net zero pledges. In the past, Farage has called for a referendum on Britain's net zero plan to slash carbon emissions by 2050. This isn't in his manifesto. Just scroll down. Instead, Reform said it would outright scrap net zero and related subsidies. It argues that this will save the UK public sector 30 billion per year over 25 years, a figure based on internal party estimates, which are disputed by the government's independent climate advisors.
Nigel Farage hasn't got a fucking clue. Yeah. And he makes promises that he doesn't have. Now, I'm a big fan of nuclear energy. Yeah. I think
it does come up in here. It says, well, it doesn't say this is in its manifesto. Reform's website says Britain is better placed to adapt to global warming rather than pretend we can stop it. The party calls for fracking and more nuclear energy. Now, the only part I agree on that is nuclear energy.
We must increase our nuclear dependency.
Fracking, absolutely fucking not. That causes more harm than fucking good.
Absolutely. The fundamental is we need more nuclear reactors. We need to rebuild our nuclear stockpile in terms of our energy preservation. And Nigel Farage is never going to do anything about that.
In fact, our nuclear energy technology has only increased over the years. It's gone by and improved.
Yeah.
It's come leaps and bounds forwards from its previous days of.
We need to replace our nuclear reactors across up and down the country, and we need more of them. We genuinely need more of them.
I don't say replace. I'd say update.
No.
No.
Once you reach the end of a life of nuclear reactor, you have to dismantle it and take it apart. That's what we had in the last podcast to talk about the Hindley reactor. You can't. They're leakage. They're damaged. Once you get to a certain age with nuclear reactors, you have to take them apart.
I would classify that as updating it.
No, Chris, you take it apart and you let that area heal for the next 50 to 100 years. That's the point.
That's the thing. You're taking it apart.
Updating the infrastructure, maybe, but not necessarily the reactor. The reactor itself has to be decommissioned.
I'll say you run off 2 over, 50 years, however it takes for it to actually.
I don't know how long. How long do nuclear reactors last? That's a damn good question. Up to 100 years with proper refurbishment and licensing.
Right,
early plants were often designed for a shorter lifespan, around 30. The UK has 30-year lifespan once.
Well, there you go. You build when the brand new ones, which will last 60 years, by the time that comes into even close to about halfway of its life, you can then turn around and reinstall the one that's actually healed and everything else, up to date everything in that. And now you've got 2. Which can then bounce off each other.
We need to build a lot of nuclear reactors. We genuinely do. We probably need 10 of those those small reactors that the Prime Minister's been banging on about. And I think that's a good thing. And again, there are policies that the Prime Minister engages in that I actually agree with. And there are when it comes towards energy, this is not one of these things I have a massive problem with the Labour Party. I think it has a reverbeat towards us getting sustainable energy. Nuclear energy is renewable. It should be always classified as renewable energy, because the amount of clean renewable energy you can get from a nugget of plutonium comparative, is it plutonium or is it uranium? One of the two. I'm not a scientist, so please forgive me if I've got that wrong.
They're on the same baseline, but I can't remember which one it's used.
One of them's for weapons, one of them's used for energy. So forgive me for not knowing the difference. I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but for the amount of energy, from what I understand of it, that you get from a nugget of those is invaluable outside of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels needs to be phased out. We need to move to an electric grid using safe, repairable nuclear grid.
As much as I like to say phased out, I think reduced to a point where it isn't causing much issue. Because it's never going to be phased out completely.
No, because we're going to need it for plastics.
Yeah.
Until we don't need plastics.
Yeah. I say we're going to need fossil fuels regardless, but get it to a level where we only need it for what we need, not for anything else.
Yeah, it shouldn't be the reason.
I know there's people that go around, we need it for electricity, we're just giving you a far more better alternative to energy.
We need to build nuclear reactors. We need to build multiple nuclear reactors across the UK. We need to deal with the power problems. We need to also nationalise the power grid. Let's be quite frank about this. The current British power grid is unfit for service. The power companies that use British power are vile. They take the piss. British Water, British Power, rail system, they all need to be nationalised for the good of the health of the country. They just genuinely do. The fact that these...
how much improvements that would actually...
Because they don't invest in the improvements.
Yeah.
Remember, we got water spillage right now because of that.
If we nationalised it, think of the improvements that would happen, because people would take pride in that.
Yeah, of course. But more importantly, Farage has no intentions of going anywhere near private sector, even the stuff that's failing. He will not nationalise. He will not engage upon a nationalistical value. So we have to realise how incredibly damaging this man is for a political party and politician. Britain, you have to be careful. This man is making 1,000 promises and will keep none of them. He will keep none of them, because it is well, actually, no, I'll take that back. He might keep the evil ones, throwing all the migrants out and then patting himself on the back while he sticks his nose in the trough known as the government. I mean, and that's what it is. These politicians get elected because they want all the perks of being politicians without any responsibility. That is the general nature of British politicians in general. It's also worth mentioning, as we're coming to a close, Chris has got a couple of things left and I've got a couple of things left, of the parties that Nigel Farage has been a party to form and inform. Currently, he's in the Reform Party, but he was in the Brexit Party. He was in the UKIP Party. He was a Conservative Party member. Remember, Britain, this man has had more fucking parties than a crackhead has gone to rehabilitation. That was probably my favourite quote I've heard online. Nigel Farage has been in more parties than your average crackhead goes to rehabilitation.
He's probably been in more parties than what the woke agendas had ideas, but there you go.
But seriously, that quote was fucking hilarious. It's probably wrong, but it's funny to think about it when you think of it. Nigel Farage has had more political parties than a crackhead has been into fucking rehab. Go on then.
And then a couple of quick fire hits from his manifesto. Among other things, Farage Party also pledges to leave the World Health Organization. And that's stupid.
Fuck me.
That's absolutely stupid. I'm sorry. But literally, the only way we managed to get the COVID thing under control, even though some people reckon it's a conspiracy, is through the World Health Organization. Abolish inheritance tax for anything less than worth than 2 million. Okay, I will give him a point on that. But that's probably one of the very few, but that's because he's a greedy fuck. Launch a public inquiry into the COVID vaccine harms. Why? To be honest, even if there was any harms from vaccines, it's still not going to appear just yet. It hasn't even been 5 years yet, has it? It's approaching 5 years.
I don't remember, to be honest. I think we're probably approaching it. How long ago was COVID lockdown? 2020 and 2021. So not 5 years yet.
Not yet approaching the 5-year mark. The only way anything's going to start propping up, if anything does prop up, will start showing in about a year. Was it reduced taxes for frontline healthcare staff workers, hand life imprisonment for drug dealers?
We need an entire investment into the infrastructure of the United Kingdom. We need an infrastructure investment. Prisons we need to increase our prisons. Remember, the Tory party shut down all our small prisons to save money.
Get rid of the woke policing, ban schools from teaching about transgender ideology, reappeal all the EU laws on British nationality. We already covered that bit. History, right, regarding schools and obviously the transgender ideology.
I have mixed feelings about that. I do believe that the ideology should not be taught to anyone under the age of 12. I believe that rational conversations about religion, ideology, are for above 12-year-olds.
I was going to say it should be covered in secondary school, but it should be
it's one of the mature conversations, I think.
A voluntary subject to take.
Yeah. I fundamentally do not believe that that. And to be fair,
do they still do it where after the last 2 years, secondary school, you get to choose your topics?
Yeah.
That's when it should.
Fundamentally, I don't share this attack. From my own very brief experiences in 𝐬𝐮𝐞𝐭 schools, the ideology of wokedom, as the rabid right would like to say, is not as prolific as people think it is. I was in a primary and secondary, a mixed area, everything ranging from 9-year-olds all the way up to 16, 17, about leave school. And from my experience, where I spent a single term, I have nothing but incredible respect for 𝐶𝐿𝐴 teachers and their assistants and everyone who works in that environment. But it wasn't for me. I mean, it's intense, and I have nothing but mad love for those kind of people who are willing to do that kind of work. But the reality is, 𝐶𝐿𝐴 or schools in general do not preach a kind of expectations of, it's not foisted on people. Conversations are had. There are people you can talk about sexuality and such like that, and there is an automatic access to it where parents aren't to know. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't necessarily agree that guardians should not be informed about children talking about these very, very serious subjects.
Under the age of talking about obviously stuff regarding sexuality
should be raised with their guardian.
It should be raised with their guardian as well.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as a call in great detail, but literally the people should turn around just.
It should be alerted to their guardian.
Just so you're aware, your child has come to speaking about
ABC, whatever the fuck it is.
ABC. Just so you're aware, so you can take it into account, and obviously
have a conversation.
If it does come home, you can have that conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Without work.
And I mean, I think that's an important factor. I think that there is a lack of trust between parents and school institutions these days. And it has been built up by the constant rhetoric of how children have unalienable rights. I do not necessarily agree but this is something I actually disagree with the EHRC, is that children are the guardianship of either the state, if they don't have lawful parents, or their lawful parents before they reach the age of majority. I do not believe that children should have unalienable rights outside of the household that they're being raised in, because I feel that does damage when cultural norms, like let's say Catholic parents want to teach Catholic morals to their children, that should not be infringed on. I believe that's an infringement on religious rights. And same with Quakers, and same with Buddhists, and same with Hindus, and obviously with Muslims.
I would say whatever happens within the household needs to stay within the household.
Yeah.
Obviously regarding morals and everything else.
Conversations,
which the parents pass on to their children, whether the children pursue that after the age of consent.
Is entirely their business, absolutely.
But I reckon having those conversational morals within the household and not letting outside bodies
interfere with the individual households themselves
is something that should not happen. If you send your kid to school, they should be there to be taught and learn, not have, as I call, a little getaway to potentially do something harmful.
Yeah. And I genuinely find that anything that involves physical changes to one's body, physical changes to one's biochemistry, physical alterations of one's internal organs, if you like, as well, because there are some extreme forms of that, should absolutely be lawfully only regulated towards those of adults. And the reason I have this argument is we're coming to the end of this podcast specifically about schools and around how regulations involving wokedom is that there needs to be a pushback. There does need to be a pushback about how the infiltration of certain ideologies have happened in schools and universities and colleges.
As I said earlier, the only time ideology should be consulted would be in secondary school level, and it should be a choice subject from the pupil.
Yeah.
But even then, because then when it comes onto that, the school, as far as I'm aware, has to let their parent know what subjects.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Their child is.
And I fundamentally believe that there is a massive lack of trust between parents and schools these days because
some try to overstep the boundary.
Yeah, because there are some bad examples. There are incredible teachers across this country. There are millions of teachers who are incredible human beings educating our young, and there is nothing but incredible respect and love for them.
99% of them will turn around and will naturally inform the parent.
Yeah, anyway. Obviously. Yeah. But then there are elements that have been allowed to be sensationalized that have gone too far. I don't believe that these so-called woke problems are as bad as Nigel Farage and 𝐬𝐮𝐫𝐞𝐿 and many of them tend to make. I do believe there should be a pushback in some areas, especially when it involves physical, biological harm of bodies for those under the age of legal consent. But I think
I've got other points on that, but that's for a different day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think that leaves us in an excellent position at the end of this hack and slash we've had at the liar in chief of Reform UK.
Lying twat face.
I fundamentally believe, Britain, that if you've come to the end of this podcast, you have acknowledged that Nigel Farage is a very, very dangerous demagogue.
And he's toxic on an extreme level.
He has dangerous ideologies. He appeals to ethno-nationalists. You should steer clear of him in every possible aspect you can.
I like to call it, he pinpoints on stuff which he knows you're going to side with him on,
or raise attention because
raise attention to areas that you think may need addressing. But everything I've looked up on here and everything else, it says that he has very minimal planning, if any planning at all, to address those issues if he ever does get into power.
My ending fundamental is Britain. Remember, this man has been in 5 individual parties, 2 of which he's abandoned and have collapsed. He has never really had a working national plan. This is not a politician who has any idea how to run a country. And I fear for my nation and my people, who I am dead set about standing my ground with, when you are dealing with someone like Nigel Farage. He is a demagogue. And that is the literal word. Demagogue, populist, agitator. He is dangerous to you, he is dangerous to me, he is dangerous to Chris, he's dangerous to anybody, even white middle-aged men. He's dangerous in his ideology of how he can affect our working lives.
I'm saying we've got enough shit to deal with at the moment, let alone him.
Exactly. He is dangerous to middle-aged white people and white men because they do not understand how dangerous he is to your work-life balance. And we already have a fucked up work-life balance here in the UK as it is. Anyway, I think that pretty much resolves our podcast for today. This has been quite enlightening and quite enjoyable from my point of view because I've been wanting to get the elephant out of the room that's known as Nigel Bloody Farage. As always, I'm John, Sean or Yahya, depends on who you're asking.
I'm Chris, have a smashing day.
This is your voice in your nation.